What you need to know about selling a mobile home or manufactured home in Georgia. Hey guys, this is Brad with Arborview Properties, arborviewhomebuyers.com, and gamobilehomebuyers.com. We're a real estate solutions company based in Metro Atlanta. We actually buy mobile and manufactured homes all over the state of Georgia. And I've been doing this for a number of years, and I have learned through the School of Hard Knocks what's involved in the sales process of selling a mobile home or a manufactured home. I'm also a licensed real estate agent in the state of Georgia as well, but I've been buying properties for cash for a number of years. So let me get into it today. I'm not going to get super into the weeds in this particular video. I feel like it's better to create some separate videos to really get in the weeds on some of these topics. So let's get into it today. So I want to talk about selling a mobile home or manufactured home in Georgia and what you need to know. First of all, is the property on land or is it in a mobile home park? That's going to make a big difference. If it's on land, who owns the land? Do you own the land? Does someone else own the land? And also, are there any title issues on the land? For instance, maybe that land was handed down to you by your grandfather, and maybe they didn't transfer the title appropriately, and that might have to get unwound in order to sell it. Is there an easement? Is the land landlocked? The details about the lot. Is the lot in a floodplain? You need to kind of understand all of those particular details. Also, it would be very helpful if you have a survey. If you don't have a survey, you can request one, or you can search your county records and you might find a previous survey, but it's always a good idea to get a new survey so you understand what's involved, encumbrances, easements, property lines, all that stuff. All right, so let's also talk about in a park. Okay, this is a whole different ball game when you're selling a manufactured home or mobile home in a mobile home park. And the reason why is because you are playing by the park's rules. What are the rules and regulations of the park? You need to know those rules and regulations. You also need to know lot rent. If it's going to stay in the park, the buyer of the unit is obviously going to have to abide by the park rules and have to pay lot rent. What's included in that lot rent? Does it include amenities? Does it not include amenities? Does it include utilities? Does it not include utilities? All that information is pertinent to the particular buyer. Also understand that if it's in a park, the buyers are very, very unlikely to be able to get financing on the home, which means they need to pay cash for the unit, or you might have to sell or finance the unit to them in order to sell it. And just understand that a lot of times the people that are purchasing homes in a mobile home park don't have a lot of money, and they generally can't pay cash for these units because they don't have a lot of money. So you need to keep that in mind when you are selling these types of homes, that it might be very difficult to sell a mobile home in a park. Also, going back to the rules and regulations, sometimes the rules of the park prevent investors, such as myself, from actually purchasing the home from you. Some of the parks have their own rules that require an owner-occupant to actually live in the park. A third party or an investor cannot own homes in the park and rent them out. So keep that in mind. Okay, let's get into the next topic. How old is the home? That does matter, because if it's pre-1976, you cannot get financing through HUD, VA, USDA. All of the government entities will not insure a mortgage on that. And in many cases, most conventional lenders will not insure a mortgage on a pre-1976 mobile home. And the reason being is because there were some certain manufacturing standards that were created in 1976 and beyond. And a lot of the previous homes don't meet those manufacturing standards. A lot of them aren't even around anymore. A lot of them have sort of deteriorated and fallen apart, but they still do exist out there. So make sure you understand the age of your unit. And if it's older than 1976, it can cause some issues. Also, depending on its age, municipalities and zoning districts and states and all those things have their own rules in addition to that. So some of them, depending on the age of the unit, may not allow you to relocate that unit at all. They may not give you a permit to move that particular unit to another location, whether it's on your own land or whether it's in a park. So you need to check with your local county or municipality that you live in to understand what those rules are in regards to moving and relocating of manufactured homes. Also, understand that in most cases, when a manufactured home is moved from its original location to a new location, it is no longer eligible to get financing through HUD, which is HUD, FHA, also the VA, USDA will not write a loan on a manufactured home that has been moved more than one time. So when it was moved to its original location, they will do financing for resales. But if it has been relocated again, you can't get financing. That means you need a cash buyer or you need to sell or finance the unit to your buyer. So keep that in mind. In terms of the age, there are inspection issues due to poor components. For example, a lot of manufactured homes built older than 10 years ago. In the last 10 years, a lot of manufactured home manufacturers have begun using normal components like regular house components and not mobile home components in their construction. So if you have a lot of time, and this varies from manufacturer, but older than 10 years ago, they have different electrical systems. They have different electrical panels for mobile homes only. They have different receptacles. And by the way, replacing the receptacles in those older mobile homes, those things are like $20 a piece. And they're notorious for catching fire because of the poor connections. That's why there's a lot of fires in older mobile homes, is because the electrical systems are just poorly manufactured electrical systems. So a lot of stuff built in the last 10 years, it actually has normal electrical systems you'd find in a normal stick-built house. Romex, normal electrical boxes, normal receptacles, normal electrical panels, all the normal residential construction stuff is in the newer things versus the old stuff has proprietary, almost like what you'd find in an RV. Also, the flooring components, the windows, the doors, the bathtubs, the faucets, the plumbing, all of that in the older units is typically mobile home specific, which means it costs more money. You're limited to where you can buy it. And it's also notorious for defects and not lasting as long as a normal stick-built residential building materials. So keep that in mind. Also, the older units that had that particle board subfloor, that stuff sucks. It's terrible. The minute it gets wet, it starts to sag. It just completely falls apart. And sometimes if you've got water damage, that requires, we've had to rip out an entire bathroom and take everything out to replace the subfloor because the subfloor got wet and got damaged. We had to take everything out of the bathroom, replace all the subfloor, and put everything back in the bathroom, which cost me like $12,000. It's not cheap. So keep that in mind, that some inspection issues may arise when you're selling the property. Also, we found, a lot of mobile homes in very rural areas that don't have building departments and building inspections may have kind of sketchy plumbing and sketchy electrical systems that they've done. I've had to fix just, backwoods plumbing that was not done properly, and we end up having to replumb the whole house because they didn't put adequate draining and vents and all that stuff. So keep that in mind when you're selling it. Have there been modifications done to the mobile home? Have you made additions? Have you built a deck or a porch or built an entire addition, added a garage? Have you added additions to the house? And were those additions done properly? Because many times, for instance, like a deck cannot be attached to the manufactured home. It has to be a freestanding deck. So if you've attached that deck to the manufactured home, that may come up on a home inspection if you're trying to sell it. The home inspector may say, hey, this is attached to the home and it can't be attached, or when you get your engineer certification. So make sure that your modifications were done properly. If they were not done properly, they can actually detract from the value of the house, not add to the value of the house, because a potential buyer may look at that and say, hey, I've got to rip all of this stuff out and redo it because it was done by Mickey Mouse. So make sure that that was done right. If it wasn't done right, good luck to you. All right, so, and like I mentioned, has it been moved from its original location? If it has been moved, it may be difficult to find financing, so keep that in mind. Is it a single wide? Is it a double wide? Is it a triple wide? that matters, because if you're going to move it, if it's a double wide or triple wide, it's going to have to be taken apart in order to be moved. And that costs more money, and it costs more shipping because you're moving 2 units instead of 1. Also, it's a lot more difficult for a potential buyer to get financing on a single wide compared to a double wide. There's a lot of financing out there for double wides and triple wides, but a single wide, the financing options are much more limited than a double wide. So make sure you keep that in mind. Is it on a HUD approved foundation? Now, some people confuse and say, if it doesn't have concrete block skirting around, then it's not on a permanent foundation. And that's not actually true. A HUD approved foundation are HUD approved concrete block piers or poured block piers. In some cases, actually steel piers. And they are installed per an engineer's specification. HUD has their own specifications on how mobile homes should be set on a foundation. For instance, like I mentioned, the block perimeter, that is actually not structural to the unit. The piers are what are the structural components. And then you have tie downs, and it needs to have adequate longitudinal, so that's long ways across the unit, stability, and lateral stability side to side. You have to have adequate lateral and longitudinal stability, and you also have to have adequate tie downs depending on your wind zone and your wind loads. Getting into that, part of the certification process is they are going to check for the HUD labels. Any mobile home built after 1976 is going to have what's called a HUD label on it. It's typically like a metal placard that's going to be applied in some cases to the frame and inside the unit, usually inside the kitchen cabinets, or maybe on the air conditioning or in the laundry room on, around that area. It depends on the manufacturer. They put them in different places. And we found a lot of times they're removed. People have replaced the cabinets. They've fallen off. They've thrown them away. They've taken them off the frame. If you don't have those HUD labels are basically a notification to the world that this home was been manufactured according to HUD specifications. So when an engineer comes to inspect your foundation, by the way, you will generally, if your buyer is getting financing, they're going to need an engineer certification, engineer inspection on the foundation, which in many cases costs anywhere from $300 to $500 depending on where you're located. Make sure that if you don't have those HUD labels, you're going to need to get a HUD verification letter. I'll do a video on that in another video. So let's see here. Let's also talk about title issues. I mentioned that briefly earlier. Some of the most common title issues that we find on manufactured homes here in the state of Georgia, especially the ones I'm going to talk about, ones that are on land, on your own land, is the titles have not been retired or were not retired properly. And the reason being is because the state of Georgia did not create a formalized title retirement process until 2004. So anything pre-2004, more than likely your titles are not retired properly because there wasn't a formal process done before that. Post 2004, there was a process created for retiring of mobile home titles. And when I'm talking about titles, your mobile home, if you have a double wide, you have 2 titles. You have one side A and side B. There's a title for each side, just like a car. It's the same. If you need to go get replacement titles, you go down to the tag office and get replacement titles just like you would for your car. There is a process now that was started in 2004 to retire the titles, which means it's called a certificate of permanent location. It's called the T-234 form. You can download it off the Georgia Department of Revenue website. I'm going to do a whole nother video about that. But let's dive into that a little bit more. So what that means that you are telling the state of Georgia and your local tax commissioner, tax assessor, that this mobile home is now permanently attached to the land. It is not moving. The wheels have to be removed. The tongue has to be removed. It needs to be sitting on a permanent foundation. And when you go through the process of retiring the titles, you are surrendering the titles back to the state, giving the titles back to the state, and then you're telling them, hey, this is permanently attached to the land. What happens at that point is it becomes an improvement on the land. Just like if you built a new house on your land, a sticks and bricks house, it would be considered an improvement on the land, in which case you get one tax bill for the land and then any improvements on it. So, I mean, if you built a barn on your land, if you put a driveway in, all those things are considered improvements on the land and you're taxed for those things. If you don't retire the titles properly, in many cases, you'll have two different tax bills. You'll have one tax bill for the mobile home and you'll have one tax bill for the land. But don't think that because you only have one tax bill that your title is retired properly. Time and time again, we run into this where people think that the title was retired and it was not retired because they've only gotten one tax bill. And the reason why is in many counties, if you file for homestead exemption, they will give you one tax bill, but technically your titles aren't retired. So what does that mean when we have to buy the unit? That means we have to go back and hopefully the original title holder that put the unit on the land is still alive, or we can get in touch with them, because we're actually going to have to get new titles done. We're going to have to transfer those titles into your name or into our name, and then we're going to have to retire the titles, and that takes time and money and a process. It's a pain in the butt. I've done it a gazillion times now. It is not fun. It's not easy. So make sure you keep that in mind. And how do you know if your titles are retired? Well, if they're done properly, you can search the county deed records and you can find where that T-234 form has been recorded with the clerk of courts. Also, you can call your local county tax commissioner's office and they can search the VINs in the state of Georgia database, and they'll be able to tell if those titles have been retired or not. Also, a big issue that we find a lot of times is outstanding liens on the mobile home titles. Sometimes if the titles weren't done properly, for instance, maybe when you first bought the unit in this is very common for pre-2004, you bought the unit in 1999, you set it on site, and you got a mortgage on it, and you paid the mortgage off. Now, maybe you got a 20-year mortgage and we're in 2024 and you paid the unit off 4 years ago and now it's paid for. We have found many times that the original bank, because these loans get sold many times, they, A, didn't retire the titles properly, and B, they never released the lien off of the mobile home titles. They did off of the land, but they didn't release it off the mobile home titles when the loan was paid off. And that can apply to any creditor. They maybe released the lien from the land title, but not from the mobile home titles. And this is why it's important to retire the titles, because then there's only one title that can be liened, not two, or, well, in case of a double, it'd be three, right? So this happens very often. And what do you do in this case? Well, you got to track down the original lien holder and you got to get them to release the lien, because there is no statute of limitations in the state of Georgia on loans on personal property. I learned this from my attorney. Last year, we had this crazy situation where I'm describing right now, and there is no statute of limitations on personal property liens in the state of Georgia. For instance, on real property, like the real estate, like the land, maybe you got a loan on it 30 years ago and you paid off the mortgage, but the bank never released the lien off of the land. Well, there's a statute of limitations. After a certain amount of time, the creditor can't collect that debt anymore. And if you've paid it off, it doesn't matter. So from the title insurance perspective, the title insurance company will look at it and say, hey, they claim it was paid off. We have some evidence it was paid off, but the lien was never released. And the other bank is out of business or closed, or the loan was sold or whatever. They'll just let it go. Unfortunately, because there's no limit on the statute of limitations in the state of Georgia for personal property, and a mobile home, just like a car, is considered personal property, not real property, until the titles have been retired. Once they've been retired, it becomes part of the real property. Because there's no statute of limitations, someone, 30 some odd years later could lay claim to that lien and say, hey, this person owes me money. So you've got to get those liens retired. I'm going to do another video about the forms that you need to fill out and how you need to do that. But you got to make sure that those liens are retired. How do you know if there are liens? You can call your local county tag office, and they can, in many cases, if you sweet talk them, they may not be able to tell you who the lien holder is, but they can tell you yes or no, are there outstanding liens on the title to the mobile home? and you may need to get an attorney involved. In many cases, our attorneys can contact them and actually figure out who the lien holder is, and then we can go track down the lien holder and get them to release the lien. If it was a personal loan from, a person and they're dead, that gets a little complicated, and there are other ways to deal with that. So you would have to get a title bond in that case, and title bonds are not cheap. On a double wide, a title bond is generally somewhere in the ballpark of $800 to get title bonds on a double wide. So make sure that if you have to do that, you understand that expense is coming, because in order to be able to transfer the title, the state of Georgia is going to need evidence of a title bond, and then they can issue you replacement titles, and you need some paperwork and documentation to prove that, yeah, I paid that loan off, that person's dead, but here's a title bond, right? So make sure you understand that. Also, what we found, title issues on the land is previous generations or previous owners may have not done the title transfer or the sale through a proper title company or closing attorney, and it wasn't done using a proper instrument or wasn't done properly, in which case now that's going to have to be unwound. So make sure you're paying attention to that. If you have lost the original titles, you can get replacement titles as long as there are no outstanding liens on the titles. You can go down to your local county tag office and you can get replacement titles. You need to know the VIN numbers for the units. And if you have the VIN numbers, you can get replacement titles. If you request them from your local county tag office, it takes generally 7 to 10 days. But lately, I'm making this video in 2024. The U.S. Postal Service is absolutely terrible right now here in the state of Georgia because of this whole, you've probably seen it in the news, the distribution facilities and blah, blah, blah. It might take you 2, 3, 4 weeks to get your new titles in the mail. So if you need them now, today, go down to Welcome All Road by the airport. Go down to College Park, East Point, and off of Welcome All Road, there is a state of Georgia tag office, which is where most of the dealerships in the state of Georgia go. And you can request same-day replacement titles at the Welcome All Road tag office. You have to fill out the application. You got to give them the proper paperwork. I'll do another video about that. Even with the proper paperwork, sometimes they're a pain in the butt. It's a train wreck down there. But you can walk out the same day with replacement titles in your hand. So if you need to do that, make sure you're paying attention to that. So, and I also mentioned about the HUD tags. Make sure you're looking for the HUD tag. Typically, it's going to be red. Sometimes it might be a larger tag, which is the engineer for the wind zones and stuff. They're not as much of an issue here in Georgia. They are in the coastal regions because you're in more of a wind zone area or way up high in the mountains where there's wind zones. But typically, like in most of Georgia, you don't have to worry about wind zones and we don't have to worry about snow loads. But in some parts of the country, some manufactured homes or mobile homes cannot be put there because they don't have adequate snow load ratings or adequate wind zone ratings. But that's not as much of an issue here in the state of Georgia. So those are the things you need to know about selling a mobile home in Georgia. We buy mobile homes for cash here in Georgia. We bought a lot of mobile homes all over the Georgia, from North Georgia, East Georgia, West Georgia, South Georgia, Metro Atlanta. I've bought them all over the place. I'm very familiar with them. We bought a lot of them. So if you have a mobile manufactured home that you want to sell for cash, we're happy to make you an offer on that. We do prefer mobile homes on land. If you have one in a park, we will buy one. But like I mentioned earlier in the video, a lot of parks have restrictions that basically prevent us from being able to even buy it in a park to begin with. So make sure you keep that in mind. So if you do have a house you want to sell, we'd love to take a look at it. We'd love to make you an offer on it. Like I mentioned, also, I'm also a real estate agent. So if you feel like you want to list it and go that way, I can help you with that as well. I'm a real estate agent with One Source Real Estate in Woodstock, Georgia. So if you want to go that route, I'd be happy to discuss that with you. But we really prefer to just buy things for cash. I've been buying, selling properties and renting and all the things for many, many years. That's what I do. I'm an investor first by trade, not a real estate agent. So thanks for watching this video. Check out all our other videos where we're going to get really down in the weeds and we're going to talk about all these specific issues that have to do with mobile homes. So thanks again, guys. I am Brad. You go to gamobilehomebuyers.com, click on the link below and fill out the form if you're interested in selling the property, or you can go to arborviewhomebuyers.com. That's our sort of main house buying website. Either one will get you to us. Thanks for checking out this video. Have a great day. Bye-bye.